Are you ready to break free from the doubts and limits holding you back? Welcome to Embrace Your Value, where therapy meets coaching to help you unlock your true worth and take control of your life.
Hi, I'm Kristen, a trauma therapist dedicated to helping you heal, break old patterns, and reclaim your power.
And I'm Jen, your support coach, here to show you how to set fierce boundaries, embrace self-compassion, and step boldly into the life you deserve.
So, whether you're stuck in self doubt or feeling lost, know this: your value isn't up for negotiation. It's time to own it.
Every week, we tackle real issues that challenge, inspire, and empower you to live with purpose and confidence.
So, grab your favorite drink, take a deep breath, and let's get started.
Because you're not here to play small. It's time to embrace your value. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. We are so excited that you are with us again today, and we have a new topic that we both feel very passionately about, and that is forgiveness and forgiving. So, what it looks like to forgive someone, and what it also looks like to be forgiven and accept that and kind of roll with that. So let's go ahead and dive in. And so let's talk about, Kristen, will you explain to us what forgiveness is?
Sure. So, from my point of view, and probably more from a therapist point of view, is forgiveness can be things like letting go of resentment, reclaiming your peace, um, what things like that, so that you can feel better about the situation. What it isn't is condoning bad behavior, forgetting, allowing people to sweep things under the rug because you're like, oh, well, I forgave them in my head, and so it's okay. Um, and so that's kind of my definition. But I think what's really important, at least from my perspective, right, from a mental health perspective, is the impact of harboring the resentment versus the benefits of forgiveness, or simply just letting go of the resentment. So, I'm a substance abuse counselor. So for me, when we talk about resentment, it's often in the AA framework. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And resentment is anything that you're sort of holding against either yourself or another. And it's used to do things like create shame, keep score, keep distance from someone else. Those are just a few, right? Now, what does resentment and a lack of forgiveness mean for ourselves emotionally and psychologically? When we hold on to those feelings of regret and anger and all of those things, the only person that's really hurting is us, right? So we forgive for ourselves, not necessarily for others. If they receive that, that's lovely. But if they don't, then really it's about how does it create toxicity in your body, whether that's physical toxicity, like creating inflammation, whether it's mental toxicity, where you kind of get in a negative mindset or even sometimes a victim mindset, and how that plays out in your life. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have one little thought to add to what forgiveness isn't. And so the way I look at forgiveness, at least in my life, is, they always say forgive and forget. And while to some degree I do agree with that, there is also a piece that I think that you don't have to, you can forgive, and you're not condoning the behavior, you're not saying that it was okay what they did to you, but you don't have to let that person come back in that same capacity. So you can forgive them and you can set that boundary and say, but you're not going to do that to me again. And the other side to that is you don't constantly remind them unless they keep crossing that boundary. So you don't throw, like, if it's say a spouse that you've forgiven a behavior, if they're not exhibiting that behavior anymore, you don't continue to throw that back in their face. You have let it go, you have forgiven it, you've set the boundary, they are respecting the boundary, and they understand that. If they aren't respecting the boundary, then you just kindly and firmly reiterate the boundary. You don't throw it back in their face to make them feel bad. You just say, we talked about this and this is how this was going to go. Are you still able to honor that? And you let it go that way. So I think that's a really important piece too, that we definitely don't want to miss, because we don't want to take forgiveness and continue, because what happens is if we continue to throw it back at their face and we continue to put it back on them, we really haven't forgiven them. And then there's some more work to be done around why we haven't forgiven them and why we can't let that go. So yeah, I completely agree. And I loved everything that you said. I thought that was perfect.
Right. And just a note on boundaries, just a little reminder, because it's been a little while since our boundary podcast, which is boundaries aren't really to control the other person's behavior. It is to decide for yourself how you're going to react if the behavior continues or repeats. So there's a whole podcast on that. And if you have more questions about boundaries, we'd love for you to go back and listen to that one. But that's when I like to kind of continue to slip in there as we talk about boundaries, because there's a big misconception that it's about how do we control other people. And it's really not. It's about how do we control ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. This is all about, like, how we control us. That is the only thing we ever have control in, is our reactions, how we feel, what we do. So it's never about controlling someone else. It's always, how are you? So even with forgiveness, how are you going to react to that person if they do the same thing to you, or they overstep your boundaries again? That's really where forgiveness comes in a lot. And sometimes, I mean, we're going to probably talk about this later in the episode, but sometimes it's a matter of forgiving yourself.
Mhm.
And
Right.
that's a huge piece of all of this, is it's not always other people. And the boundaries thing is the same. Sometimes you have to set boundaries for yourself, not always for everyone else. We have to learn that whole self-awareness piece, and we have to learn that and really hone it and own it, to be this whole person that can do these things easily, and I always say with grace and love, because I think that's super important.
Yes, and in case it doesn't come up later, I'm not sure. We'll see how it goes because we just wing some of these sometimes. But when I have noticed that people stay stuck, and you alluded to this, when people stay stuck, especially in their trauma, and they're not able to break through, that is typically where there's a forgiveness of self that needs to go on, and that needs to be repaired, because there's a process for forgiveness. There's a very specific one, and like AA lines it out really great. That's part of the step work that you have to do when you're in AA. But if we're talking about people who aren't in the program, or don't have a substance abuse problem or an alcohol problem, there's still some steps you can follow. So you really have to look inward, right? Reflect on yourself and say, what's my hurt here? What's my emotion? How did this thing affect me? Um, and then understanding what your trigger maybe was, or what wound it hit in you. Um, and then, once you do that, it's great to do it with a professional, or even, a friend, a trusted friend, or something like that. You need to sort of reflect on how holding on to it is affecting you. So again, back to what I said before, it could be inflammation in the body. Maybe you're feeling tired. Maybe you're feeling like you don't want to do the things you want to do. It could manifest as depression. It can manifest as anxiety. So recognizing those symptoms and really understanding what they mean for you and how they're affecting you. So the next step for that is you have to really decide to let go, and that's something that in my work with people can be tough because there is a lot of betrayal survivors that come into my office, whether it be an infidelity or a lie or even we're looking at spousal abuse or any kind of physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse. Um, you have to learn and figure out what you need to do to decide to let go of that resentment, whatever it is, so that you can begin to do the work of forgiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And some tools that you can use for this, Kristen talked about, working with a professional or with a friend, but you guys know that I love journaling. You can always journal. You can always there are guided meditations out there for forgiveness, that are really good. And so those are a couple other ways that if you need to do it on your own, you can completely do that and do it for yourself. Um, I think that's really good. And then of course, just being sure that you reconcile, even if you don't reconcile with that person, that you definitely reconcile with yourself. So, Kristen talked about all the steps and doing that and deciding to let go for our well-being. And I think that's part of the reconciliation with ourselves. But just making sure that, like I said earlier, we don't keep coming back to it. We don't keep sitting on it. Because I always tell people, if that's the case, if you keep coming back to it, you just need to go through the process again. And it doesn't mean it didn't work. It just means there's different layers to it. There's different levels of hurt. There's different, whatever, something might have triggered it and come back to it. There's nothing wrong, and forgiveness is not a one and done, ever. I have learned that so many times in my life, that forgiveness is not always a one and done. A lot of times it comes back and that hurt comes back. And so you just go through the process again. And each time you do, it typically gets easier. I'm not going to say it always does, but it typically gets easier. And therefore, you kind of go through it a little quicker. It's a grieving process. Forgiveness is a type of grieving process. And when we grieve, it's never a singular type thing. It's always something that comes in phases. That's why they say there's the 7 stages of grief, and or whatever it is, 7, 5. I don't know, numbers elude me, but there are stages, and we don't have to go through them in order. And forgiveness is exactly the same way. And that's why when you have forgiveness in relationships, you have to really spend time deciding how you now want that relationship to look, because that's actually a choice you get to make. Now, they also get to make that choice. So sometimes they won't be in alignment, but you do get to make that choice, and you get to decide, what do I want this to look like? And how do I want to move forward with this person? Especially if it's a family member, a spouse, a really good friend. I've had friends where I absolutely adored them, but they've overstepped a few too many times. And I've had to take a step back and say, you need to deal with you. And when you're done with that, and when I'm a little more healed, let's try again. Let's look at our friendship from a different level. Let's come back to this. And I have found that to work in most instances. There are a few that I just simply had to walk away and say, I can love you from afar, And you know, those people I still think about. I still like pray for them. They still come up in my thoughts. Not every day, of course, but every, you know, about once a year, somebody will hit me and I'll be like, oh, I wonder how they're doing. But you know what? I've let them go. Most of the time, I don't even know how to get in touch with them anymore. So it wouldn't matter. But I can still love them. I can still wish them well. I can still want the best for them and not be a part of their life. And that is totally okay. And that is what I think helps me get over guilt and shame for my part of it. Because that's the other thing we have to bring into this is forgiveness is never one-sided. There's always something. I mean, it always, you know, there's a reason that the saying, it takes two to tango, is so popular because there's always something. There's always two people involved, at least two. And so getting over that guilt and shame, like what was my part of it? What do I need to ask for forgiveness for? How do I approach that? How do I apologize? How do I do that? And so just knowing that, that's what really helps when we're dealing with relationships, especially because we have to know that it is two-sided and we have to know that there is more than just one person coming into this and being at fault. So part of forgiveness is forgiving and accepting somebody else's forgiveness. And I think that's really, really important to make sure you're doing both sides of it. What would you like to add to that, Kristen?
Sure. I've got a couple things to add, which is forgiveness can be very difficult. And some of the reason why that is, and I thought about this while you were talking, is sometimes a past hurt or a past wound that's similar to the one that we're experiencing can amplify or compound what we're feeling in that moment about that situation, person, whatever, or even ourselves, right? And so if you've had a life where maybe your parents were very critical and you've done a lot of work and you've gone to therapy, you've had coaches or whatever it is, and then you've gotten over that parental part of it. Sometimes if a spouse comes along, or maybe even a child or a really good friend, and they seem critical of you, then that can sort of hit that little button, right? And so this is another case of something you spoke about earlier, which is, we need to go back and look at, is that wound, that old wound, really healed? And so, yeah, that was one thing I thought of when you were talking, is like, this is just another layer, right? You were talking about layers. So, deep wounds, really bad betrayal, societal pressures, like maybe you are married and maybe your spouse cheated on you or stole from you or something like that, and you've told your friends and family, and now you want to forgive that person and you want to welcome that person back into your life, and your friends and family are very much against it, right? They want to protect you, they want to do what's best for you. So sometimes that can be really difficult, right? And you have to be able to move through that, so that you can get to the other side of your own forgiveness journey and what that looks like for you and for the other person that you are working to forgive. So I just want to really say, these things are hard. You mentioned a grief process, and I very, very much agree with that. Grief is not just somebody's passed away and we're grieving that. It can be literally anything. It can be the loss of what you thought your relationship was going to look like, and now we have to sort of set a new framework or try to kind of figure out what it's going to look like moving forward, as opposed to, okay, we're just going to go with the status quo. So I think just trying to encourage people that this is a difficult journey, no matter what your forgiveness is centered around, or whom, and that it's a lot of work to try to move through all the steps that we talked about and all the emotions that are caught up in them.
Yeah, and I want to add something to your story of if you have somebody in your life that wronged you and then now you've chosen to forgive them, but you've told everyone, you might have to encourage your friends and family to forgive them as well. Like there might need to be a layer in there around that. And that might have to come from you, where you say, I took the time to forgive them. I'm asking you to forgive them for me. They're then forgiving them so that that relationship can all be healed together. So that kind of hit me too. I thought that was good. Um, so I want to point out that there are a couple of really cool things that you can do to really help yourself through forgiveness. And actually, one of them is something that I'm running as a workshop in January. So I'm going to throw a little plug in here, which I don't normally do, but and that is writing a forgiveness letter. And that is actually a workshop I'm going to do in my private group on Facebook in January. And that can look a lot of different ways, but it could look like um, writing a letter to someone that you need to forgive and saying all of the things, just getting them out there, just saying all of the things that hurt you, that upset you, and then telling them the way you want the relationship to go. You don't even necessarily have to send this letter. This is really just a tool for you. You could send it if you think it would make a difference and it's something you feel strongly about. The other thing that I have had clients do and that I've encouraged clients to do is to write the forgiveness letter they need to hear from somebody else. So I have a client that did this, and she did it from her father's perspective, where it's the things that she needed to hear from him. And that gave her a lot of really good peace. That's the word I want to use, peace around their relationship and what she wants it to look like. Like she had some real clarity on what she wants it to look like versus what other people want it to look like that are his side of the family that think she needs to just let go and move past it, which absolutely, but she didn't have to do it in their way. And so she did it her own way. And it really, really gave her some good perspective. So that is just a beautiful little way to do it. And if that's something you're unsure about, please feel free to reach out because I would love to give you more tips around that. Or you could come to the workshop or whatever. I think it's going to be a free workshop. So there's not even any charge to it. And no, I'm sure I'll record it. So it's something that I could share with the listeners at another time. You can also use daily affirmations, or like we talked about, guided meditations. And I can come up with some guided prompts for you too, or between Kristen and I, we can come up with some. But you can always ask yourself, what am I holding on to and how is it serving me? How would I like this to look versus how it looks right now? I think those are always really important questions to ask, whether you're writing and journaling or you're talking it out or you're just thinking about it. Like, what does that look like? You get to choose. We always say you have the choice. So we want you to kind of be in that position.
Yes, what a great set of techniques. And I love that you are doing that workshop. I think that's going to be a wonderful thing for people to be able to experience in the new year because I know people see it really as a benchmark, but another thing to remember about forgiveness is, we are all only on this plane for so long. And so sometimes we need to let go of things so that there's no regret or guilt or shame later for not having done that. Because, being able to forgive, again, not forget, and I love that, and I hate that phrase, and I think that's sort of what society teaches us. So forgiveness really is about growth, right? How are we growing as people? How can we do better? How can we find ways to improve our lives? And again, when forgiveness is for you as a person, your ability to either forgive others or forgive yourself is really going to help you grow. And it creates a sense of empowerment. And that's one thing that I just love about what you said about the letters. Immediately, the word that came to my mind was empowerment, right? Whether you send the letters or not, there's a sense of empowerment. It sounds like that your client got from writing the letter that she would have wanted from her father. And then it's also, it's an act of self-love and freedom. There's no real downside to forgiving others, because it is for yourself. So it can help you rediscover power and joy, because as I said in the beginning, like, it can put you in a very victim frame of mind. And so, that's not the healthy way to look at the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So I have a couple of questions for you guys just to reflect on, just to kind of get you started. What does forgiveness mean to you? If you didn't have that defined for yourself before, after listening to this, what does forgiveness now mean to you? We'd love to hear any of that from you. So if you want to leave that feedback, we'd love to hear that. And who or what do you need to forgive to move forward in your life? What does that entail? Is that um, a family member? And again, I'm going to reiterate this. It's probably yourself and someone else. There's almost always that compound component where we have our own stuff in it too. So if we're truly taking responsibility for our life, who do we need to forgive and ourselves? And what does that look like? What are those things that we needed to forgive? Um, so I just wanted to leave you with those two thoughts. If you guys want to answer those, you of course always have access to our email. That's always down in the show notes. You can always leave us a comment wherever you're listening to this, because we love that. And whatever you need, or you can find us in the DMs on social media. Both of our information is in there. And so you can come in and talk to either one of us, or you can put a post out there and tag both of us, because that's always a good way to get things rolling. And so whatever you need to do, however it works best for you, just don't sit on it if you have a question or you need a little support, because we're here for that.
Yes, we are absolutely here for that. And that is 100% why we do this podcast. So just to leave you guys with, just do your best to take at least one small step towards forgiveness today as you reflect on Jen's questions. And then, Jen, maybe you and I could try to collectively get together some resources for people. Definitely put your workshop in the show notes. I love that. I really want our listeners to have access to that. Resources for ways that they can start working on this on their own. So let's try to do that for our listeners. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds great. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. And we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Talk to you later. Thank you for being here with us today.
If today's episode hit home, don't just keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Because everyone deserves to know their worth.
Next week, we're diving even deeper with more insights and tools to help you break free from limitations and live authentically.
Until then, keep raising your standards, owning your worth, and embracing your value.